Johnnie Walker here. It sounds of the 70s. And a big exciting day today because we got a two-part special on one of my favourite bands, The Clash. There was the Sex Pistols and then there was The Clash. And when Joe Strummer was asked what The Clash stood for, he said, I think people ought to know that we're anti-fascist, we're anti-violence, we're anti-racist, and we're pro-creative, and we're against ignorance. And those were the values that The Clash stood by for all the time they were together. Sadly, we lost Joe Strummer, but guitarist Mick Jones, Paul Simonon, bass player, and Topper Headon, the drummer, recently came by our studios for a good old chat about the old days. And when they went to America, you know, when a British band goes to America, they kind of want to ingratiate themselves with their audience, you know, that we want to break America. Wow, it's great to be in Pittsburgh tonight, all that sort of thing. The Clash, in true no compromise style, would start their set when they played in America with the song I'm So Bored with the USA. The Clash, I'm So Bored with the USA. And we have Paul, Mick and Topper with us. That shows great confidence to go to America to play a gig live and to open with that song, Mick.
It wasn't really about when bored with America, because we liked America very much, and all American TV shows, films, and the music, of course. It was like kind of about the Americanisation of England at that time, more or less. It was like and they kind of, the audience was hip to know that. You know what I mean? It was like a kind of a hip thing, and so that played to our benefit, and definitely to our advantage. We go out playing that, and it was like something that the American people who were hip ones would come to our show, obviously. And they got it as well, you know what I mean? So it worked to our benefit, although you would think that's not the way to go, but it actually was. But I don't think we did anything like by contrivance. It was just like a very natural thing, you know.
Paul, it was you who came up with the name The Clash, was it not?
Yes, that's right. It really come about, I suppose, because of the period of the time that we were living in, and when the band started, there was a lot of, well, I suppose in our childhoods, there was a lot of strikes going on in the 70s, and the country was in quite a serious economic depression. We used to have these conversations with Bernie Rhodes, and he would sort of instigate a discussion about the political period that we were living in and what we were going to do if this happened or if that happened. Or so there was a lot of friction outside in general. If we walked out on the streets, there'd be members of the public that would quite antagonistic towards anyone that looked like a punk or even looked different. So in a way, the word The Clash became sort of quite appropriate, insofar as also there's a lot of references in the headlines of the day of various strikes, battles between strikers and the police, and the word The Clash kept coming up, so it seemed an apt
and after
name
we
for
had
us. And
after we had it, you couldn't stop seeing it in the paper, and that once we had it as a name, then we noticed it everywhere. There was even a book on the Spanish Civil War, like a novel called The Clash as well, so we were looking everywhere, you know.
And what was the difference between The Clash, Mick, and other bands around at the time?
We were the best.
Sound of water being poured there. Bernie Rhodes was mentioned.
Yeah, I think that has probably made a big difference for us, was Bernard Rhodes, really. In the same way that Malcolm was quite important for the Pistols, Bernie was important for us, and he did sort of, you know, there'll be sort of a lot of open discussions about things and to make you consider things, but then you had to come up with the answer yourself.
Topper, you said the difference is The Clash were the best, but there was more than that, though, wasn't there?
Yeah, so, I mean, we were the only punk band really that broke America. We didn't want to just be big in this country. We went to the States, and we spent a hell of a lot of time in the States. We got criticism at the time in this country because we were spending so much time in the States, but we wanted to carry our message to the world.
We came from punk, but we weren't restricted by it, you know, and so we managed to move on, and I think that was one of the things that set us apart from the other groups, you know what I mean? A lot of them were just like kind of a one number, you know.
The Clash and Police and Thieves in the Street from the first album. And Paul, were you a big influence in recording that? Because you definitely...
No, the influence on that particular song was the riot at the Carnival in 1976. And me, Joe and Bernie Rhodes were there when it all started kicking off. And then within moments, the police charged the crowd, which had us in the middle of it. And Bernie's glasses went flying one way, and we got sort of separated for a moment. Bernie went home to get another pair of glasses, and me and Joe pretty much spent the whole afternoon roaming the carnival riot, you could say. And the song came from that, because that, insofar as the song was very popular, it was the theme song of the carnival. It became a hit. And so it seemed an obvious choice for us to cover it.
Now, the second Clash album, Give 'Em Enough Rope, was produced by a guy who used to be with Blue Oyster Cult.
He was actually the producer of Blue Oyster Cult and the Dictators, and another group lesser known called Pavlov's Dog. Very interestingly, Sandy Pearlman, who is he we're talking about, coined the phrase heavy metal as well. He was a kind of a journalist and an intellectual of music.
What's this about a punch-up that happened, though?
No, that
It did, but that was like...
That was a fan.
That was early on in our... One of our guys was on the door, and it was a big mistake, because he came in just before we were supposed to go on stage, and he had strict instructions not to let anybody in, and he went like, no, you don't understand, but there was a little bit. But that was very early on in our relationship with, and he persisted, and he liked the band,
didn't put him off, which was great.
and he produced a very great record, I think, you know what I mean, with lots of drums and lots of guitars on it, you know what I mean? It was just like
a supersonic sound, I think.
It really was.
No, it's a brilliant album, and I mean, you were trying to say, Topper, in a way, he sort of passed the audition. He passed the test, really.
Well, like I say, yeah, even getting punched on the door, he was very
still
keen.
loved the Clash.
He was very keen to do it, you know.
Yeah. The track I love on Give 'Em Up, well, I love lots of them, but Safe European Home is a fantastic record to play on the radio. How did you manage to, when you recorded that, how did you start it like that? It's kind of, there's a drum beat that's like a gun, and then in it comes. Is that the way it started?
I think Sandy did like backward ambient recording and stuff, so you get like the echo coming forwards and backwards. I think he did stuff like that, like
but I know what you mean,
stuff to make powerful.
It's like that's how we started on stage. 1, 2, 3, bow, and straight in. It's a very powerful beginning.
It
to the
is,
song,
and it's also about the air around the notes as well. If you can understand, it's like a bit esoteric, but it's like the air around them and the space between the actual notes is like precisely produced as well.
Right, had you thought of that, Topper?
No, I hadn't.
No. Had you, Paul?
No, he was like a scientist. To me, he might as well have had a white coat on, really.
Yeah.
Which they used to do in the old days, in the studios. They used to have white lab coats on. Because it's a very precise art.
All right, I just wanted to play the beginning so we know what we're talking about. Here it is. So there it is. That's just a few seconds of the way Safe European Home starts. So that was you, Topper.
Well, no, that was the way the song started, and I just started to do it with a snare beat, and then Sandy made it that very powerful, like a cannon going off, which is a great start to the album.
I think also to say not only the drums, but we all hit at the same time, and that's actually the thing that makes it explode, you know what I mean? Because we're all hitting at the same time, and we're all singing the song with our instruments.
We used to use that to start on stage for many months as well after recording.
Yeah, it is so good. Let's play the whole thing now so we can enjoy the air around the notes as we listen to it. That's Safe European Home from The Clash, from the album Give 'Em Enough Rope. And it's so lovely to see the three surviving members of The Clash back together. We've not talked that much about Joe. So he was in this band, the 101ers, and he saw the Sex Pistols and he realised that everything had changed.
That's right. Well, he just realised that his band were old hat, and we were looking for a singer, and me and Mick had actually seen Joe's band play a couple of times, and we thought he was pretty good on stage. And there was a moment where we had a run-in down Port Vila Market where Mick said that we thought he was good, but his band was rubbish. They weren't rubbish. They were a good band, but they weren't quite...
They were quite happening at the time, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It was quite outrageous for us because we hadn't done nothing. But having said that, we were at that show at the Nashville as well, wasn't it?
Yeah.
It was like... There was a big fight when the Pistols played. You know what I mean? It was half-staged, almost. It was like because there was a dead moment or something. So it was like, let's fill it up with punching somebody in the audience or something. And they were supporting the 101ers, you know what I mean? And they made a big impression. The first time you saw the Pistols any time was, like, transformative, really. Probably changed everything. They were one of those... nothing else matters before type groups, you know, and they came out on like that. They were only supporting the 101ers and they made all this, and it was like it was just total excitement.
I mean, the emergence of the Pistols and punk and the Clash, it was very challenging to a lot of established bands. But Pete Townsend of The Who, he took a great interest in the Clash, didn't he?
Yes,
He came to see you a lot.
He's very supportive and came to quite a few of our shows. We even played on stage with him in Brighton. He came on stage with us.
He got on stage and did White Riot with us down in Brighton,
And
which was great.
we were both from West London, you know, as well, so that was like definitely a connection there.
And Mick, the writing of songs with you and Joe, did that just really come about naturally?
It was different. It's pretty natural. I would describe it as natural, and it developed into really good team work, you know. And then it went through all different phases.
And the song Julie's been working with the Drug Squad?
Yes, you know, Operation Julie. It was based on that, which was like the biggest ever to date drug bust in Britain. It was all they had undercover guys, and there was acid, LSD labs and things like that, you know.
In Wales, I think, wasn't it?
Yeah, a bit like, you know, English Breaking Bad.
Julie's been working for the Drug Squad from The Clash and their second album, Give 'Em Enough Rope. And we talk more in the next hour with Mick and Paul and Topper, especially about London Calling, that great album, and also one of the greatest rock and roll photographs of all time on the front cover when Paul Simonon smashed up his bass. Did he regret smashing that bass guitar? We'll find out in the next hour. Starland Vocal Band and Afternoon Delight. And let's get into part two of our Clash special. And recently chatted to Mick Jones, Paul Simonon and Topper Headon, the surviving members of the Clash. And did you have a ghetto blaster in the old days? I loved it. I had a great big one. And the thing was to have, you know, the biggest ghetto blaster, you know, in your area, really. 2 cassette players, so you can record one cassette onto another one. They were just brilliant. And they've used that whole concept of a ghetto blaster for this box set that brought them together. The Clash and a box set? What's going on?
It's pretty much the box of all the recorded works of the Clash.
Yes.
Of the
We all laugh, actually, because...
the Strummer Jones Clash.
You said in 1977, hey, we're going to do a box set. You go,
You
get
wouldn't
out of here.
believe it. But it's beautifully designed by Paul here, and I took executive control of the remastering.
But are you sure you've not taken away any of the magic? Because it wasn't supposed to be perfect, or...
I don't think. I think we've just only enhanced it.
And talking about design and stuff, Paul, because you wanted to be an artist originally, did you not?
He is an artist.
I am.
He is, we are an artist. Yeah.
No, when I was a little kid, in the cot with my pen and pencil, I thought, right, what am I going to do today? No, truth be said, when I was a kid growing up, I noticed that there were a lot of artists called Paul, like Paul Gauguin, Pablo
Rubens,
Picasso, Paolo Veronese. There's hundreds of them, and I thought, obviously, this is going to have to be my job. And I was quite good at drawing, so yeah, I eventually somehow managed to get a scholarship to go to this art college, and then after a year, all I wanted to do is do life drawing, but they're trying to ban it at the time. So I got a bit disillusioned, and this is when my mate at art college, he said that 2 blokes had accosted him in the street and said, "Oh, are you a drummer?" Apparently he had 2 drumsticks sticking out his back pocket. And he went along to their rehearsal to try out for the audition. I said, "Oh, I'll come along with you to back you up in case there's some trouble." And I went along, and that's when I first met Mick and Brian James and Tony James and Bernard Rhodes.
But it came in handy, because it was the day when CBS, you were in the CBS offices, the story goes, and the guy said, "Come and have a look at our art department."
Yes, he did, yeah. He said, "Oh, yes, come this way. I'm going to show you your album cover." I said, "Really? Okay, let's have a look." And he held up this sort of black and white photograph of a pair of old boots on a cobbled northern street. And I said, "Well, first of all, they're not Dr. Martens, and that's up north, that's not down here." And I just had to make it clear that, you know what, it's very nice, but we've already done our album cover, because me and Bernie worked on the first album cover.
So what was it like being a member of the Clash for you, Topper?
Best 5 years of my life. I've been very hard to kind of follow. And that's what's another great thing about being back with Mick and Paul working on this, is that it just brings back a lot of great memories. Like I say, best 5 years of my life are fantastic, and something that I've never been able to kind of follow or, get over, really. So.
And a lot of people talk about your drumming technique on Train in Vain.
Yeah. It was just fun enough, I think, actually.
It swings,
yeah.
That's why it's so swinging.
Believe it or not, Mick said, "Why don't you go boom, da, boom, boom, bap, shh." So then I made it swing. But some of my ideas came a lot from Mick, intros and stuff. So, but yeah, I have. It's like a white soul beat now, isn't it? Train in Vain.
It is really R&B.
The Clash, Train in Vain, from the album London Calling. Now, let's talk about producers again. So we've had Sandy Pearlman. He went through a sort of bit of a process. And then London Calling, an amazing guy called Guy Stevens, who the record company didn't want. Tell us about Guy Stevens.
Guy was a record company man originally. He was a DJ in the 60s and very influential to the bands of that time by turning them on to the music that was coming in from the States, especially, And he set up under Ireland the Sue record label, which was like an American label, but he took up the British version of that, and he brought in records, Barefooting,
Donny Elbert, A Little Piece of Leather, I remember. That was
Harlem
on Sue.
Shuffle.
Yeah.
Bob and Earl, all these records were on Sue Records over here, were brought in, which was like, I don't know, it was part of Ireland.
And the other lovely quote I heard about Guy Stevens, where he said, "There's 2 Phil Spectors in the world, and I'm one of them."
That's become a famous quote now, yes.
And what was this, Paul, about? He was swinging a ladder around in the studio and smashing up chairs. Is that true?
Yeah, it is true. I mean, the thing is that I think it was Guy's way of injecting a certain atmosphere into the room.
Guy's way of expressing himself.
And
get a sense of danger in the atmosphere.
That's it.
Partly.
But there were some sort of strange moments when we were recording a particular song, and we looked into the booth where the engineer and Guy was, and we were playing this song, and they were sort of wrestling over the desk, and we couldn't quite figure out what was going on. So we stopped playing. We thought we was actually recording something at the time. We stopped playing, and we went into the room to find out what was going on. And apparently they were wrestling because Bill Price, the engineer, was trying to stop Guy put on a live record of Arsenal beating Manchester United live through the system while we were recording.
He was a big gooner,
yeah.
And he used to go. We were recording near Highbury, and every day he used to go to the ground first and just pay homage to Liam Brady. He'd do this, and then he'd come to the studio.
He played a huge part in making London Calling the record it was, because we'd spent many months writing it and rehearsing it and getting it all really good, and he came into the studio and he just added kind of so much life. He wouldn't let us kind of like over record things. There was one example of it's come up recently. Paul and I was talking about Brand New Cadillac. When he said it was a take, I thought, hang on a minute, that speeds up. And he said, no, all great rock and roll speeds up. It's a take. And it's only just recently I found out Paul said to him, oh, no, I made a mistake. And he said, no, it's great. It sounds great. So there were two of us who were thinking, oh, we should re-record it. And he kept it on the album. And it is great. He kept the whole album exciting and live and, like, with his, swinging ladders around. And
it was a contrast to Sandy Pearlman, that's for sure.
Yeah.
One day we were sitting in the studio and Guy came in and he came in with this guy we thought was his friend, and he sat at the back of the studio really quietly all day, and then we got to the end of the session, like after about 8 hours and that, and we said, Guy, aren't you going to introduce us to your friend? And he goes, oh, that's the cab driver, can someone pay him please?
The Clash from London Calling and a brand new Cadillac that speeds up. It's great. Leave the mistakes in if the vibe and the feel is there. So the iconic cover on London Calling. Paul, why did you break your bass?
Well, no, I didn't break it. I smashed it because I was totally frustrated with the... first of all, I couldn't hear what I was playing on stage well enough. So it almost felt like I was miming, so I couldn't hear the notes. And also I thought there was a situation going on which happened a lot in England, whereas if it's a seated venue, if the audience stand up, then the security enforce them to stay in their seats, and it causes a friction. Whereas I thought this was the situation happening in New York, because everyone was seated and nobody seemed to be allowed to get up, and so that frustrated me. Or else the other side is that maybe they didn't like the show, so it annoyed me. So it was just a spontaneous moment, really.
And Penny Smith was on hand to take the photograph.
It was supposed to be a day off, she said, and that's why the photograph is slightly blurry, because it was a completely spontaneous moment, and she fumbled for her camera to quickly, because she sort of sussed something was about to kick off.
Because it was a good bass. Do you regret smashing it up?
I did throughout the rest of that tour, because the copy, the spare one I had, was really light, and it did not have the same sound. So things just got worse, really. I should have smashed that one as well, really, but...
you could have broken that one. Like,
like
what do you do when you're branded and you're like over your knee?
And what about the song London Calling itself, Mick? There was a bit about the BBC used to use that phrase, London Calling, London Calling.
That's right, Ed Morrow used to do it, reporting back from London to America during the Blitz. But our inspiration was, at the time, there was a talk that if the Thames Barrier burst, everywhere where we lived and that would be underwater.
I would have drowned in Fulham.
And I would have done in Notting Hill.
I'm on Ladbroke Grove. I was on Ladbroke Grove Hill. I'd be all right. Kensal Rise.
So that was the beginning of it.
And there was all that stuff in the papers at the time around the bit expecting another ice age, and it was a lot of doom and gloom.
Nuclear warning.
Yeah, they were. If you'd read the papers in those days, you'd have sworn that the Earth was going to end imminently.
So that's The Clash and London Calling. Ronan O'Reilly, the guy who started up Radio Caroline, he said about a lot of these 60s bands and 70s bands, he said they were going to change the world, and he said, and all they did really was change their postcode.
But you know
and
what?
It was a big mansion in Surrey. Yeah, go on.
And then that sort of stops you roaring with anger, doesn't it? Like, once you get a mansion and a kind of, like, a great girlfriend and all your life changes, your anger, you lose it, you know what I mean? But I don't think that's true of Joe's lyrics. He was very conscious of that. One of the differences. And also, we didn't come from that, and that wasn't the main point. The main point was the music and move things forward somehow.
And also, back in the day, we didn't lose our anger that way, because we never made any money when we were together. With the double London Calling being released for the price of one, and
our manager kept us poor, and so we were hungry.
Keep them angry, keep them poor and angry. While Joe was still with us in the later years, there's often talk about the Clash should get back together, should reunite. And it never really happened. Did you want it to, Mick?
We did, actually. We did actually, but we didn't tell any of you about it. But then we became friends again, and that was what was really mattered to us. We never got back together again as a group, but we became friends very soon afterwards. I would say it wasn't very long.
It was such a bonding experience, and one of the reasons we never got together was only in the last 10 years I've been in any fit state. You know, that was one of the reasons. The time just never was right.
It was never right for all of us, anyway. But I think now I look back on that and I think that was probably also meant to be. You know,
I'm really glad you didn't.
It's a better thing, really.
Yeah.
There's some things you can't recreate.
You can't recreate, but it would have been different.
Yeah.
You know, in its defence, I'm sure it would have been. Maybe we would have made a record of where we were at that time, or something. So it might have been, but who knows?
Like Joe said, there's something great about coming, saying your piece and going. And when he said that, I thought, yeah, it's true. That's wonderful, you know. And we didn't grow old in public. It was like an intense explosion for 5 years, 6 years. Bosh.
And it's lovely to see the three of you together again and having a laugh and getting on, and it would be lovely to see.
Getting on, yeah.
Getting on each other's nerves, yeah.
But it'd be lovely to see you on stage playing music. You know, that would be good.
That's not going to happen.
I mean, me and Mick played, as I said earlier, we
Yeah.
played with the Gorillas. We did that, and that was fun.
Who knows?
Got a little taste.
But not
there.
now.
Great. Paul, thank you very much for coming in.
Thank you very much, Johnny.
Mick, lovely to see you.
Thank you, you too.
And Topper, thanks a lot, mate.
Thanks, Johnny. Nice one.
Thank you. There they go, The Clash, Mick, Paul and Topper. Great to chat with them. And check out the sound system, which is The Clash's back catalogue, personally remastered by the band themselves. Mick did all the remastering and Paul designed the whole thing. And you can find out more at theclash.com. With our audience, you know, that we want to break America. Wow, it's great to be in Pittsburgh tonight, all that sort of thing. The Clash, in true no compromise style, would start their set when they played in America with the song I'm So Bored with the USA. The Clash, I'm So Bored with the USA. And we have Paul, Mick and Topper with us. That shows great confidence to go to America to play a gig live and to open with that song, Mick.
It wasn't really about when Bored with America, because we liked America very much, and all American TV shows, films, and the music, of course. It was like kind of about the Americanisation of England at that time, more or less. It was like and they kind of, the audience was hip to know.
Well, I suppose in our childhoods there's a lot of strikes going on in the 70s, and the country was in quite a serious economic depression. We used to have these conversations with Bernie Rhodes, and he would sort of instigate a discussion about the political period that we were living in and what we were going to do if this happened or if that happened. Or so there was a lot of friction outside in general. If we walked out on the streets, there'd be members of the public that would quite antagonistic towards anyone that looked like a punk or even looked different. So in a way, the word The Clash became sort of quite appropriate, insofar as also there's a lot of references in the headlines of the day of various strikes, battles between strikers and the police, and the word The Clash kept coming up, so it seemed an apt
and after
name
we
for
had
us.
after we had it, you couldn't stop seeing it in the paper, and that once we had it as a name, then we noticed it everywhere. There was even a book on the Spanish Civil War, like a novel called The Clash as well, so we were looking everywhere, you know.
And what was the difference between The Clash, Mick, and other bands around at the time?
We were the best.
Sound of water being poured there. Bernie Rhodes was last. Johnnie Walker here. It sounds of the 70s. And a big exciting day today, because we got a two-part special on one of my favourite bands, The Clash. There was the Sex Pistols, and then there was The Clash. And when Joe Strummer was asked what The Clash stood for, he said, I think people ought to know that we're anti-fascist, we're anti-violence, we're anti-racist, and we're pro-creative, and we're against ignorance. And those were the values that The Clash stood by for all the time they were together. Sadly, we lost Joe Strummer, but guitarist Mick Jones, Paul Simonon, bass player, and Topper Headon, the drummer, recently came by our studios for a good old chat about the old days. And when they went to America, you know, when a British band goes to America, they kind of want to ingratiate themselves.
Oh, that. You know what I mean? It was like a kind of a hip thing, and so that played to our benefit, and definitely to our advantage. We go out playing that, and it was like something that the American people who were hip ones would come to our show, obviously. They got it as well, you know what I mean? So it worked to our benefit, although you would think that's not the way to go, but it actually was. But I don't think we did anything like by contrivance. It was just like a very natural thing, you know.
Paul, it was you who came up with the name The Clash, was it not?
Yes, that's right. It really come about, I suppose, because of the period of the time that we were living in, and when the band started, there was a lot of